and helping me
Sure.
organize this. So thanks everybody for coming. So today we're going to talk about some radical truth. And I use the activist Angela Davis's definition of getting things out at the root, and really understanding the root connection as well between our body and business. So I am excited to share all of this with you today. So this is what a lot of people wanted to talk about, and also as creatives who are in Dreamers and Doers, I've noticed that a lot of creators and business owners tend to also have a lot of depression and anxiety. It's part of the creative source, and it makes sense. And once you see the body business connection, you'll see why so many creatives struggle with depression and anxiety. So we're going to talk about some natural treatments and totally holistic treatments today. And by holistic, I mean the emotional and physical patterns. If you really want to resolve depression and anxiety, you have to do both. Otherwise, you won't feel as good as you can, and you won't be able to get to the sweet spot, what I call option C, where you don't have to choose between your work and your health. So that's what we're going to go over today. And I'm happy, write down any questions. I love talking about this stuff. So we'll get to that at the end if you have any questions. So just a brief story about me. Basically, 17 years ago, I showed up at my doctor's office and I had been depressed for a decade. And depression, mental illness runs in my family. So I kind of thought, oh, this is genetic. I had been trying all these different antidepressants. I would also try natural stuff as well. And I cycled through various therapists. And I didn't get any worse, but I definitely didn't get better. But basically, through a lot of schooling and a lot of feeling like I hit a wall with traditional medicine when it came to getting better, I realized that the root cause of all of this, all of my depression and struggling, was imbalance. My body had been really imbalanced from cancer treatments. I had had cancer as a teenager, and the chemo and all the steroids had dysregulated hormones and my gut. And as also, I was the first generation of childhood cancer survivors. So there was this huge gratitude. I'm still grateful that we were alive, but there wasn't this understanding of the emotional impact on that. And basically, I was binging and emotionally eating, thinking I had a willpower and weight problem when really I had unresolved PTSD. So what I basically discovered to really get through this depression, that wasn't a result of genetic. Yes, maybe my family genetically has predispositions, but we also inherit the same lifestyle and patterns from our family. So I had to basically heal on 3 different levels, through nutrition, how I handled uncertainty, which us in Dreamers and Doers, being creatives or business owners or pursuing really visionary work, you're going to be dealing with uncertainty all the time. And I had to figure out how to make my cancer experience count to really heal. As a result, here today, I've reversed my depression, my chronic depression. I was diagnosed with IBS, that's gone, skin issues, and I feel holistically healthier today at 40 than probably ever in my life. So I have the personal experience, but then I also went to the University of Pennsylvania, where I got a master's degree in how adults change. It's called organizational dynamics. It's basically like getting an MBA in human behavior. I created my Truce with Food method there, which is a holistic process to help people heal through food, but also emotionally. Also studied at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, Institute for Psychology of Eating, mentored in functional medicine for 4 years, and I've been doing this for 12 years. My work's been featured. It's not completely updated. I have to add some Forbes and some podcasts, but over the years have definitely had a lot of clients featured in this stuff as well as my work. So pretty experienced in this field. So let's get started. So I want to talk about just some basic facts, though, that we have to depart from with when I'm going to give you what I'm going to teach today. First of all, women haven't been particularly studied in healthcare, unfortunately. So a lot of the understanding that we have about medicine, about even how we metabolize alcohol, this is all brand new, that they've discovered that women and men are different. But anxiety, I hear a lot from entrepreneurs and my clients. I'm anxious, I have anxiety. And it's really important to understand that anxiety is often how depression shows up in women. And the reason that that's important is you really need to understand the root causes, because they're different. Anxiety and depression have different root causes. And we'll get into a little bit of that, the difference. But I just want people to understand that if you are feeling chronic anxiety, that may be depression. And that's something that I didn't really realize for myself and would have been hugely helpful. And again, we have to address the physical and emotional reasons for lasting resolution of these chronic issues. And I say when these are chronic, because even though I had done all this healing in 2012, I had got sunk into another depression. And it was necessary for me to go through that. But it wasn't, I had struggled with, like, and a lot of my clients, this constant feeling of anxiousness or feeling really low or that something's missing. So these are cures. There will be times sometimes when we still have acute depression, but this is more about the chronic treatment of it. And I also want to mention that anxiety tends to get a really bad rap, and when it is too much, it is unbearable. However, a healthy dose of anxiety is not a problem. It shows you really care about what you're doing and that you're doing things that are trailblazing and new, right? If it's been done before, you probably wouldn't have quite as much anxiety. And so I just want to emphasize, because natural treatments and treatments in general, there's a nuance. It's not black and white. And so the goal is to reverse enough of depression and anxiety that you can make the anxiety of pursuit, of creative pursuit, of breaking down new barriers work for you. So a lot of times clients feel like they're broken, or that this is something they just have to get rid of. And I just want to, recognize that when we're doing new things, there's going to be some anxiety, and that can be really healthy. It's a great way of showing it matters to you. Okay. So one of the root causes of both anxiety and depression is blood sugar control. Often clients think that only diabetics have to worry about blood sugar control, and this is shifting. When I was trying to figure this out 20 years ago, the language, or I should say 17 years ago, the language and collective understanding of blood sugar was different. But our blood sugar is one of the root causes of anxiety and depression. And our blood sugars control our moods. And I want people to think moods are more like the weather, right? And so there could be a storm coming in, there could be sunshine coming in. And those are more what we're feeling on a daily level. And they're created by our blood sugar control. So if our blood sugar is imbalanced or it isn't resilient, meaning it can just crash right away, we're going to feel daily mood swings that can be quite drastic, especially if you're not eating the right foods for yourself. And so what we eat at one meal determines how we're going to feel for the next 3 to 5 hours. And I always like to give the example. I know it's not a food, but it's something that affects our blood sugar, is caffeine. So when I drink coffee in the morning, I am brainstorming. Carlos, my husband, calls it big plans alley, right? I have all these big plans and I'm firing off all these ideas. And then when I crash a couple hours later, I feel like I just have a massive to-do list and I'm overwhelmed. So that's an example of the weather of our moods, right? It can be really high for a little bit. And when the trick with health actually is that you have an absence of symptoms. So when your blood sugar is balanced, you actually have an absence of fatigue, an absence of brain fog, an absence of anxiety. And this, I think, is probably one of the most challenging things in our healthcare and wellness discussion, because so many of my clients, they think they're doing okay. And then once they feel better, like truly well, they can't believe how bad they felt before. And when we look to everybody else, all of this subpar health has been normalized. And so we think we're doing okay when really we have a long ways that we can improve, which is exciting because we can feel a lot better. And I also know that in dreamers and doers and a lot of with my clients, hormones are a big issue. And it's really important to understand that the root cause of hormonal health, which also influences anxiety and depression, is our blood sugar. So blood sugar is the lever that influences how healthy your hormones are. The other root cause from a physical perspective, anxiety and depression, is gut health. And I think of our gut health as more the background feelings like climate, right? If you're in a particular climate, our climate is drastically changing right now. There is a metaphor for that with our gut health as well. Climate takes a lot longer to change, right? And it's more like these background feelings. When I was struggling with depression, it just felt like it took so much for me to feel good. It just felt like it took so much effort. And if everything wasn't in an exact place, and then one thing would fall over, and I just could, I lived with that feeling for 12 years. And so it's more of a background feeling than the highs and lows we might feel during the day. And what's important to realize about our gut is that that contains more neurotransmitters than our brain. So I always tell clients, like, and if you can see my fingers right now, like when these neurotransmitters are on fire, that's how we feel anxiety, right? Or that's when we feel discontent, because those neurotransmitters are doing this frantic dance. Our gut also contains 70% of our immune system. And so it really controls a lot of our inflammation. And it's really important to understand that depression is an inflammatory issue. It is not a serotonin deficiency. That is a powerful cultural myth that is slowly fading away, but has been shaped by the pharmaceutical industry, because when they can target something like serotonin or cholesterol, then you can make a drug for it. But depression is actually an inflammatory condition. And part of what my clients realize is they've been chronically inflamed for a while, whether from birth control that was covering up symptoms from steroids that they were on, or something like me, combination of steroids and chemo that really destroyed their gut. And we often hear a lot of times, you aren't what you eat. And the reality is you are what you absorb. And so if we have a leaky gut, which is when the lining of our gut health starts to separate, that cell lining is about 1 inch, it's very fragile. When it starts to separate, food starts to come out into our bloodstream, which it shouldn't be there, and our system starts to create immune issues, right? Our body starts to attack itself. And so that also causes malnutrition. And even though Americans tend to be overfed, most of us are malnourished because of the state of our health. And so it's really important that we absorb what we eat. And that can be a big root cause of depression as well, and why our gut health is so important. Okay, so I like clients to think about the double helix of a DNA. And blood sugar and gut health, they influence, and they're always talking to each other. And they're kind of connected via the horizontal line of the double helix. And so they're always talking to each other and controlling each other and influencing each other. And the good news here is that what supports your blood sugar is also going to support your gut health, and vice versa. But I give you these two separate systems because they're two separate discernment tools to help figure out what foods work best for you, because there isn't one diet that works for everyone. And the recommendations I'm going to give you next, and as you move forward in your health journey, is I really want you to understand that no matter what you're doing, it should lead you back to nature if you're really addressing the root cause. And that is going to be what leads to lasting relief. And so think of real food and sunlight over powders and supplements. I think one of the things that's so exciting to me is when clients really start to get well, and it takes time, 6 months to a year, they start realizing they don't need their vitamin D supplements. They don't need all these powders that they were taking. Things actually get simpler. And I think as wellness has exploded as an industry, right? In the integrative health world, I kind of straddle both camps, or I should say traditional medicine. People love to bash traditional medicine, but oftentimes in the wellness world, people have recreated the big pharma model, but they're putting people on supplements and powders and superfoods and all these kind of things. And there can be a place for that when you're healing. But long-term, you shouldn't need probiotics. Long-term, you should be getting sunlight instead of vitamin D. So this is, I think sometimes the health routine that we think we have to get better causes anxiety. And really, it should be simpler. And I fully recognize that simple isn't easy, and that's what the second half of our talk is about. But it's really important to understand when you're getting to the root cause, things will be simpler. And Yeah, so that could be a whole other talk. But I wanted to give you guys some really easy food recommendations for immediate relief, because when you're struggling with anxiety or depression, you can have a really big incentive to eat well, and it can be really hard, especially when you're trying to manage some other things in your life. So these are, I've followed in on like the three things that my clients tend to get the most bang for their buck. So have caffeine with your breakfast, not before. Often people, especially people like the people in Dreamers or Doers who have big lists to do, big dreams, they fuel up with coffee first thing in the morning, and it helps them off to the races, right? Sometimes some of my clients who are entrepreneurs or in artists who have recording careers or musicians, they don't even want to stop to like eat in the morning sometimes. But you have to have caffeine with your breakfast, because that will, if you don't, your blood sugar will skyrocket, and what comes up must go down. And it also makes the quality of our work really anxious. So if you've ever felt like you're on a tight deadline and you just have to get something in, that's often what caffeine does on an empty stomach to us. And you get a huge adrenaline rush. You're in a fight or flight response and can't heal there. So you may get a lot done, but you also may find it's not the most creative work at that time. The second thing that is so important, especially with people who struggle with depression and anxiety, are they need to add natural fats to every meal. I know keto is really popular, and I'll explain in a second with my bonus tip why it works in the beginning. But keto is really popular in Silicon Valley and with a lot of people who struggle with anxiety. And healthy fats are super important. I think our mothers who had us in utero, is because that's when our health starts to build. Most of us were born during the low fat craze, right? And that has really, really hurts our health. So healthy fats are things like egg yolks. Never pay more for egg whites. Avocados, nuts, seeds, ghee, if you can tolerate butter, a little bit of dairy. Ghee is dairy-free butter. But those are going to be really helpful at every meal. And most people, just dipping your salad into some dressing is not enough. And also when you go out, even to fancy restaurants, they are probably using vegetable oils. So it's better to just ask for olive oil there. But adding natural fats to every meal is really, really important. And at the end of this, presentation or workshop, I have a breakfast experiment that can help you start to realize how much fat you need and what kind of diet is best for you. So if you're feeling like, well, how much? There's a breakfast experiment to help you figure out where you lie on the vegetarian to Mediterranean to paleo spectrum. And the third thing is, and this is, I know, very controversial, especially for people who are vegan and vegetarian, but again, the low-fat vegetarian craze has hurt people, especially creatives, and that's a whole other presentation of how creatives tend to need to be more Mediterranean and paleo. But adding quality animal protein at least 3 times a week, it really helps turn over your GI tract lining. It helps keep your blood sugar balanced, and all the omega-3s and good nutrients in there really help people with anxiety and depression. And so I tell people at least 3 times a week. I'm someone who needs it every day, like, and especially at lunch. So don't be afraid of animal protein. There is, again, not one perfect diet for anyone. And people who tend to struggle with depression and anxiety, I've seen with my clients and with when we're looking at their nervous systems, need animal protein. And the cool thing is these changes will help you cut back on sugar and processed carbs, which really fuel anxiety and depression. But the reason that I have people start with these 3 recommendations that I've shared with you is because often bad food or alcohol, it's not the problem, it's the solution. We use sugar or processed carbs when we need more energy to finish a project. We need it to unwind at night. A lot of people use alcohol to unwind. And we will get into the patterns that wind us up here shortly. But it's easier to add in and balance yourself. And then a lot of the quote bad habits, which are, again, solutions, will fall away on their own. And then I wanted to give you guys a bonus tip because the blessing and curse I have is I tend to be ahead of my time when it comes to wellness stuff, not anything else, tech, nothing else. I'm like a 90-year-old woman inside, but you're going to start hearing a lot more about quantum biology. And quantum biology is when you take a more integrated approach to when we look at the cells and biology. And on my podcast, I have an episode upcoming about the importance of natural light. And so I wanted to give you guys a bonus tip of 20 minutes of natural sunlight every morning before you check your phone. Natural sunlight, we absorb so much energy. About 66% of our energy needs, which again, food is about energy, comes from the sun. And we see it, we get the nutrition through our eye and through the skin. And this is why it's important to limit UV light, blue light at night and whatnot. And this is also why keto works in the beginning, is that quality fats have a very high light density. And so light may not seem connected to nutrition, but it totally is when you look at energy. And if you've ever been on the beach all day in the sun, especially if you've absorbed the sun, you know that you tend to not be as hungry. And that's because you're getting that nutrition that you need. So, So wait, I wanted to, I'm trying to figure out how I can go back there. But the sun is my bonus tip for the day. So that's also really important. And for people who struggle with depression especially, you tend to get those light boxes. And I think you'll get even more from the natural light, because just like vitamin D is a reductionist model of how we tend to, our whole culture, including functional medicine doctors, holistic health people, we always want to reduce things, but the sun gives us things that we just, that even a light box can't get. And look, I live in Pittsburgh and it is gray here. There's only like 60 sunny days a year, but even if it's gray, you get a lot of the benefits of being in natural light. Okay. So we are going to switch gears here now to physical health is a metaphor for emotional health. And this is really where the body business connection is really, really strong. And not only obviously with our bodies, if we're feeling well, we make better choices, we feel more creative, we feel more in choice and power. But our physical health is really a metaphor for our emotional health. When my blood sugar was crashing and everything, when I didn't know how to balance it, my moods were crashing. I was all over the place. Like I said, when I was depressed, it took me so much energy to feel good, and so much effort. Otherwise, everything came crashing down. So these are some of the questions that I think is important to help us bridge to our emotional health and really value it, even though it's invisible, right? We can take a supplement or eat healthy fats, but these emotional patterns are invisible. But today we're going to start to make them more clear. It can be easier to discount it because it's not so tangible. But we want to start asking ourselves, why are we on an emotional roller coaster? Just like when our blood sugar crashes. Where and how are we emotionally turning on ourselves, like how the gut attacks itself to produce inflammation and autoimmune issues? And where are we struggling to digest life? I have a lot of clients who come to me with Hashimoto's or depression or anxiety, and they've gotten a little bit better with some of the food changes, although often they find all the food changes to make them at once overwhelming because they're running businesses. And all of us who are running businesses or pursuing creative leadership, visionary work, no, it's going to be a roller coaster no matter what. And so when we make it harder on ourselves with these emotional patterns, it can be really overwhelming to make so many changes at once. And so focusing on the emotional patterns also takes a little bit of heat off of the physical changes, and helps people heal exponentially further. Because they're working on both levels. And the cool thing is I've found, especially a lot of my clients who are running businesses, they want to start with the emotional piece, because then the food and the healthy habits take care of themselves because they have more time and more space to do that. And they trust themselves more to make the time for eating well and exercise and sleep. So, okay. So what are these three stress responses? And the three emotional patterns we have, and I also want to preface, the same way that a little bit of anxiety is good, a little bit of stress is really good. It makes us more resilient. We get more creative the more constraints we have. So again, not all stress is bad. It can make us really powerful. The problem and even these patterns of being a competitor, avoiding, or accommodating. The reason that we even have these patterns is that they were really useful and they've gotten us really great things in life. And so part of what I'm talking with clients is they want to beat themselves up for doing these things. And it's really important for people to realize that these patterns have gotten them a lot of wonderful things in life. They've often were born out of our childhood or times when we went through traumatic experiences. I will give you my own example. When I was diagnosed with cancer at 13, I accommodated the doctors. Whatever they told me to do, I listened to them. And that was a really smart thing. It saved my life. However, when I was in my early 20s and kept listening to doctors, that was the death of me. I was not getting better. I was just being put on more and more medication. And I just was really struggling. And so I had to stop accommodating the Western medicine system. And again, I don't never accommodate what my Western doctors tell me, but I am so much more of an advocate and getting to the sweet spot, which I'll call option C. In my life with my health now. So I just want to use that as an example, as these patterns aren't all bad or all good. And it's all about how we use them. And what I've found with entrepreneurs and people who are leading in a visionary way is these patterns have also made us very resilient, right? And that is a strength we have. That's why we're in business for ourselves. That's why we lead. That's why we want to do things differently. Again, it's when it tips over to costing us more than it's giving that becomes a problem. So how these three stress responses affect our health and our business is that these three stress responses keep us in a low grade fight or flight response. So we can only heal our bodies when we are in what's called parasympathetic dominance. And that's what you hear of the rest and relaxation. That's when you're breathing deeply, right? That is when you're healing. All your efforts to eat well, your efforts to sleep, we heal when we're in this parasympathetic response. We can't heal when we're in a low-grade fight or flight response, which these patterns often create. And people, I think the biggest surprise for my clients, in the same way that they've normalized not feeling physically well, they've normalized these patterns in their lives. I like this example, and I had a client come on my podcast and share this. She even, her big self-care thing was she went and got her nails done once a month. And then as we were going through it, she realized that the time that she went was accommodating her nail stylist. She's like, oh my God, even this thing that I thought I was doing for myself, it was kind of stressing me out because she only had this one time that matched my schedule, right? So these patterns are everywhere because they work so well for us. The choices we make when we're in these patterns often cause more anxiety and down moods. Often especially we'll avoid something, we'll push it over the rug and feel like, oh, okay, I'll deal with that team member later. But then that's still in the background, like, oh, I still have to pick up the slack for them, or there's this conflict. So this is another way that this adds a ton of stress and work and unnecessary weight on our shoulders. And then these stress responses are also what makes us turn to food for energy, alcohol to unwind, and then food and alcohol to stimulate us when we aren't getting fulfillment from our work. All of us who are in dreamers and doers are incredibly creative people. And remember, creativity is also how you think, right? I used to be so black and white. I thought creativity was only how you wrote, sing, or, crafted. But actually, creativity for me is how I think. For a lot of my clients, it's how they lead, how they want to lead their teams, and the offerings that they want to create. That creativity stimulates us, right? We need that in our lives. But often if we're so stressed that when we're so stressed from these responses, it takes more and more stimulation because to stimulate us and make us feel good because we're so burnt out. And so that's another way that these stress responses really cost us from a health perspective. So I'm going to give you an overview of these three stress responses. And also at the end, I have a link to a quiz that I have on my website so you can see which one is dominant with you right now. We fluctuate through all three of them, but we tend to have one that's really weighing on us. So this is a big one for entrepreneurs, especially, is the competitor. And when we know when we are in uncertainty, and these are often triggered by uncertainty, right? Any little decision we need to make, choices we're making about the day-to-day things, but the bigger things. And the question that we know we're in a competing pattern is, am I ahead or behind? And I know for the first several years of my entrepreneurial life, I felt behind. And I still sometimes do. Often when it comes to our body and our weight, am I winning or losing? And there's a protective feeling there, is anger, that we tend to feel. Sometimes everyone is in this pattern differently because all of us are different. Some people are more sensory people, and so they just feel anger. But it's a protective feeling of what we really want and need. And our thoughts tend to be really aggressive when we're in this competitor pattern. And some of the business behaviors that we do are we skip meals. We set really aggressive deadlines for projects and revenue. We are most concerned with the finish line, not the process. And we tend to isolate ourselves. One of the examples I can use from my own life, being a competitor in business, is when I first started out, and this was 12 years ago, the wellness space was very different. But everybody was doing recipes, and I don't actually really like recipes. They're great for people, but I was more interested in the why people weren't sticking with changes and everything. And I really was comparing myself to all these people who, at the time, everyone was getting ad revenue from their blogs. And I was doing, I mean, I've been profitable since day one, but I didn't have the following. So social media was still new, like everything was on Facebook, but I was comparing myself, and I really isolated myself because I felt like I was so weird and different and behind because I wasn't doing all the other things that people were doing. And so we self-sabotage. We compare ourselves to our old self, maybe with our body, right? And also our work. A lot of times I've done that with like, oh my God, if I would have stayed in the corporate world, or that was in my early days. Now there's no going back, but in the early days. And we self-sabotage when we're in this competing pattern because the benchmark is always moving, right? As soon as we say, we'd like to get to this revenue, and then we get to that revenue, and then we're like, well, now maybe I want to do collaborations, or I want to get to this many social media followers. And then it doesn't necessarily bring us the fulfillment we thought it would. And so we move the benchmark. And the real growth opportunity here is how can I self-actualize and really focus on what's so meaningful to me to create the impact only we can from our unique experiences rather than burnout. Because if we don't change these patterns, they become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We are behind. We don't finish. We do stew in anger. And again, when I really focused on doing my own thing, and it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden one day trust your own path. It just means it gets easier and easier over time. But an example of this in my own life was a couple of years ago, before I started my podcast. Everybody had, like, I had missed the Instagram, the bandwagon when everyone went over to Instagram. And I've actually just really new on social media, even though I've been doing this for 12 years. And I was comparing myself to everyone. And my social medias are nothing compared to what a lot of prominent wellness people are doing. But I decided to focus on the podcast because my work involves a lot of depth. It requires a lot of conversation, nuance. And I chose to do that 3 years ago. And my podcast has been amazing, incredible for my work, expanding my reach, exploding my business. And I love doing it. I do love Instagram, but I don't love social media. But that's a great example of when we really focus on what our values are and what's important to us and listen to our own path, we can get out of these patterns and get to even better results, which I'll explain to you what that pattern is, how to do that, get out of these patterns in a little bit. The next pattern is the avoider. And the avoider tends to think, don't rock the boat, chuck it, right? I won't say it. I don't know if we can swear on these. And the protective feeling there is resentment. And I just wrote a post to my list about these protective feelings, but the protective feelings are like a Cadbury egg. We have these hard emotional feelings at top, like the chocolate of a Cadbury egg, because it's protecting this soft yolk middle of what we really want and need. And And, you know, the avoider starts to get resentful because they really want it to be their time. They really want their shot, but they're avoiding it. And we know that we're in an avoider pattern when there's a lot of condescending self-doubt. What's the point? I don't want to rock the boat. It's not going to be worth it. With my clients, when it comes to food, I'll just focus on the exercise, or I'm just going to focus on the food rather than delving onto the emotional aspect. When it comes to business behaviors, we tend to procrastinate. And this is also why procrastination tips and productivity tips don't often work, because we're in an avoider pattern and all of these patterns are protective, right? They're protecting us. We will pivot. I have seen this happen with a lot of clients. They think they have to pivot when really they have to sit with the discomfort. You know, running a business is hard. It is not all glory. But I've seen a lot of clients, before we've worked together, have pivoted only to realize that that might not have been the right choice, but it was a way of avoiding things. They push things like difficult vendors or clients or underperforming team members under the rug. Because again, I'll deal with it later. There's going to be an easier time to deal with this. When it comes to our health, we often think there's going to be an easier time to deal with this, when really we don't have to choose once we get to this other pattern that I'm going to get to. And another business behavior is magical thinking. I remember in my early days, I wanted Oprah to discover me. And what I realized was I was like, oh, that'll mean I don't have to learn about marketing. I love what I do, but the sales aspect of things have been really challenging. And not challenging. It's just a skill set that I'm not actually that interested in, but you have to be interested in if you want to be a successful business owner. I had another client. She just was like, she was always on the road. She's like a rock star, like Grammy Award winning rock star. She's like, once I'm off tour, it's going to be easier, right, to take care of my health. And so that's magical thinking. No, she tours all the time. That's the life of a rock star. And so we tend to, when we're in this avoider pattern, we think there's going to be a magical time. As a result, how we self-sabotage when we're avoiding is we make things more difficult by building them up, and we do miss out on opportunities because we think things have to be perfect, or the timing has to be perfect, because we're trying to avoid the discomfort of getting started. And so the growth opportunity for avoiders is to generate momentum in their business that is more surprising and fulfilling than the fantasy of perfection. And you start to get so much more creative when you're in that muck, and in some of the discomfort. And it's actually better and more surprising. So that's the growth opportunity when we're avoiding something. Okay, the last one is the accommodator. And when we're in an accommodator pattern, the thinking is, am I doing enough, right? This is big time with clients, right? How can I adapt, make this work? And the protective feeling is guilt. And we're worried that guilt is, are we doing the wrong thing, rather than standing in, trusting that we're doing enough and trusting that we can have our vision in our way. The tone tends to be, when we're thinking accommodating thoughts, kind of like an irritable pleasing, put upon. Well, I have to do this for the client, or this is what I promised, or, you know, it's kind of like you're people pleasing, but you're not super happy doing it. The business behaviors of this are adapting to whatever clients want, often over delivering. And I know that it's important to over deliver, and often we're over delivering in ways that aren't really valuable. Trying to fix everything. This is especially big if you're in the coaching world, but trying just to fix things for people rather than them having to do their own process. Taking on team members or clients' emotional tension. That's part of how we fix, right? That is when we know that we're in this accommodator pattern that's really exhausting. And we self-sabotage when we're accommodating rather than doing it out of like the generosity or it's truly valuable. We tend to keep score, which leads to exhaustion because we never want to owe people or not be of value. And so the growth opportunity is to lead with a creative vision that aligns with our values and what a segment of the world needs. Often with accommodators, we think everybody needs to like us when really you don't. Those of you who know marketing probably better than I do know you don't want to appeal to everybody. And same is true with what we lose when we accommodate everybody. It can often make us dilute our niche, can make our vision be diluted, and our offerings be diluted. Okay, so all of this also is adapted from the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. And people sometimes wonder, why does this come from a conflict model? But if you think about when we're worried about doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing, being the wrong thing, right? Doing the wrong thing, we're setting up this fear of being wrong, which is how we internalize psychological conflict. And so this is the graph of the conflict style. So when we're in the competitor mode, we tend to think of things as winning or losing. And what happens is we really value our goals when we're competing, but we don't value the relationship of our body. We don't value the relationship with ourselves. And we probably don't value the relationships with other people. When I was comparing myself to other people on social media, I was just focusing on how different and wrong I was rather than, maybe these people are really great and this isn't a popularity contest and I could develop a relationship with them rather than feeling like I was this ostracized person. And our pattern there is that, again, we compare based on culturally conditioned power metrics, popularity, weight, followers, revenue. And it's not to say that stuff doesn't matter. It's more important to figure out what metrics are important to us based on what really makes us feel alive. And I'll get to how we get to that in a second. When we're in the avoid pattern, the assumption is, the belief is I lose, you lose. This is where we actually don't value our goals and we don't value the relationships, right? If we really want to be in a relationship with ourselves or other people or our team members or our customers, we have to really value what they say and what we want. And so again, the pattern there is better not to rock the boat. It's a lot of the thoughts that keep us from taking any action. When we're in the accommodate pattern, we really value the relationship, but we don't value our own goals. We put other people first, and that can sound really noble, but we're doing it so that they like us. This is also why putting ourselves first on our self-care list does not work, because often we're not putting ourselves first because we're getting a benefit out of that, a perceived benefit. Because when we're accommodating, we think that that I have to lose so the other person wins. And the pattern is a martyr pattern. I'll over deliver and rescue so you like me, because you can only like me if I'm doing things for you rather than the quality, rather than maybe the value the business brings, the value I bring, etc. And so to get out of these patterns, and what we really want to do is focus on where we value our relationship with ourselves, with other people, with our clients, with our business, and we value our goals. And that is in this collaboration space. And this is where creativity thrives. And this is where we start to figure out what works for everyone so that it's really fulfilling. And what we need to start asking ourselves is, what do I need? And what does the situation need? And so this is where we get to that sweet spot of option C. And I'm so passionate about this because I think a great metaphor to explain this to people is my sister, who's also she's a tech entrepreneur, sent me this report by McKinsey that they had studied the lean in phenomenon that was supposed to liberate women. And what they found was, drumroll, it did not work. Basically, women worked harder, they tried harder, they did all of that stuff, and they did not advance, they did not make more money. All they got was more work. And I think a lot of times we are trying to recreate the patriarchy with lipstick on, in the systems that we follow, in the people that we look up to and try to learn from, when really we're not going to be any happier, more fulfilled, and we're blocking the very creativity that we can bring to the situation. And so when we are in this option C space, we create what hasn't truly been created before. And so that we can have it all. So, and again, it's a tricky space, but we don't, in my opinion, want to recreate the patriarchal, racist, hyper-capitalistic options that are already out there. There's enough of that. And I think if we're in dreamers and doers, and what I've seen with the conversations, I think you guys are on board with that. And again, part of, I would even say, radical feminism right now is taking care of ourselves without, as women, versus thinking we have to throw ourselves under the bus because we don't have to. Take some time to get out of those patterns, but it can happen. And when we're in that option C, our body actually supports our business, and vice versa. Because when you're collaborating with your body houses your soul, which is which is where your creativity is. If you can even think about when you're hyped up on caffeine, sugar, and alcohol, how cloudy you feel and how your intuition is clouded, versus when you are taking great care of yourself and exercise and you feel clear and focused and almost like a conduit, right, for creativity to find you. So when some tips to start to get you into what I call option C is to get into this creative collaboration with yourself. When you start to identify you're in these patterns, what do I need? What's important to me here? And then what does the situationer need, or what's important to my client, my team, and my project? And you will be surprised at how asking this completely changes your life. So many clients think they knew what their client wanted, or they knew why their team member was underperforming. And then when they actually ask them, hey, why are you struggling? How can I support you? Or what's important to you? Especially like with different offerings and clients, they realized that they had this overblown idea of what they had to do, and they were creating all this much work for themselves. Asking about deadlines, right? And setting that up front. And getting clear on all that is totally often not what we think, because we've been in these competing, avoiding, and accommodating patterns, and they make us see the situation in a certain way. And when we do this, we start to build self-trust with ourselves, because we realize that we can collaborate with ourselves and get really amazing results. We build self-awareness. I think a lot of us confuse being self-critical with self-aware. I have clients who they've been to therapy, they've done every self-development thing you can think of. And yet they realized that often what they were doing was just being more critical of themselves, and learning how to better manage how people were looking at them instead of focusing on their own patterns. And this really helps you develop a vision that's more true to yourself and the unique things that you can bring. Because a lot of people who are really creative, who are entrepreneurial, they are that way because of childhood trauma, or the patriarchy, which is just traumatic for women in general. But when we start to do this collaboration, what we're doing on a deep level, you could call it, shamans would call it soul retrieval, Jungian depth psychologists would call it shadow integration, Buddhists would probably call it wholeness. I'm not sure, but whatever the name is, what we are doing is we are integrating parts of ourselves that left from trauma. And that ultimately over time resolves stubborn depression and anxiety. And then when we do this, your business or the creative impact that you're making as a leader or whatnot, that becomes a potent healing modality. The research on when people feel like what they're doing matters, their biomarkers are healthier than people who are just focused on happiness. When we're focused on what they call the hedonistic treadmill, where we're just focusing on the next happy moment, those people's biomarkers aren't as strong as when people feel like even when they hit challenges, if they're meaningful, their health metrics actually get better. So I think that's a really cool offering that Western medicine or the research into some adult development has given us. Okay, so people wanted to realize, and I know that we're going to wrap up here, how to recognize these patterns. This is just being able to name them is going to be really hugely helpful for you. And you might start to see them everywhere. It can be a little nerve-wracking at first. But these three responses are active when we are worried about saying, doing, or being the wrong thing. And you often will start to recognize this when you have the I have to, I should, I must, because there's a right choice, right? Each of these patterns get us into black and white thinking, or all or nothing, or either or. And that's when we feel extra stressed, is when we don't see that we have any choices. And you can recognize this when you have mental food or self-doubt gymnastics. So a lot of times, if you've worked with a cognitive behavioral therapist or done mindset work, people will tell you to reframe your thoughts. What I'm telling you is actually you don't even have to pay attention to those thoughts. They're a recognition that you're feeling unsafe. And then that's when we get into these patterns. So whenever we feel analysis paralysis over food or work, we are most likely in one of these patterns. Or you can, an area of your life that you feel is out of control, or you only have two choices, right? Like, I either finish this deadline or I'm going to be behind. That is an example of when, I'm in my competing pattern. What you can do is name the stress response then. Just again, gives you some distance, and naming that calms our nervous system down. Part of why this work is really challenging is you're in fight or flight when you're in this, even if it's low grade. And when we're in that, our amygdala is active. We can't be creative. We can't think of other situations. And so you can ask yourself, what do I need? What does the situation and person need? And it's so important to get clear on both. And I didn't include this, but a really pro bonus tip is, if you have time, do not react right away. You will feel so differently about the situation even a couple hours later, or even the next day. I've made a practice of even just not getting back to non-urgent emails in 3 days, and I get better questions, I get better ideas, and it doesn't hurt anything most of the time. I know sometimes you have to get back right away, but you can start to practice this in low risk situations. Okay, so I wanted to leave some time for questions. So if you guys are interested in this, and you can take the What's My Comfort Eating Style quiz. And I wanted to let you guys know about this because there's also a secret podcast episode that gives you questions to ask yourself when you're in each style. So there are certain questions to get you out of competitor mode, certain questions to get you out of avoider mode, and certain questions to get you in accommodator mode in that secret podcast. And it goes a little bit more deeper than we had time for today. So you can take that on my website. And then if you're interested in, again, ideas for healthy fats, where you fall on, how much healthy fats, in addition to the other tips I gave you today, you can go to the Breakfast Experiment, and you can just sign up for it. It's at alishapiro.com/dreamers and doers. And it's a really simple experiment, because a lot of times people think they're experimenting, but they're often just going to extremes. And this is a very simple experiment that makes you not be all or nothing, and really starts to activate that curiosity muscle that is one, to me, big metric of if we're healthy, is if we're being curious and engaged. Okay, so now questions. And Hannah, do you want to take it from here? Or help me with the questions?
Sorry, just getting reconnected. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, actually there was one that was submitted via the chat. So Julia was wondering if when you were speaking about like getting sun, if that's why cloudy days make you so tired.
Well, yeah, I think when you're looking at what they call your sun callus, this is kind of getting crazy, is that you can build it up over time. But if you don't have that reserve, almost like your battery of a cell phone, yes, that can be in part why it makes you so tired. For sure. The sun is such a potent energy source. But yeah, that can be a reason. And you can build it up over time so that those cloudy days don't affect you as much.
Okay, does anyone else have any questions? Hey, Julia, thank you so much for tuning in.
Oh, great. Everyone said it's been amazing. I'm glad. I hope it's helpful. Sometimes I'm just talking and I'm like, is this too much?
It was
a lot.
I was like, wow, there were so many times where I was so many practical things that you went over. So what we can do is we can, Olga and Sarah, if you have time to kind of introduce yourself.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to do just one recap for everyone. So it's just on the next slide, just so that they can kind of so we can summarize, if that's okay.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to recap for everyone so that you can, and then, so getting the right nutrition for your body by using your blood sugar and gut health as discernment tools. You can interrupt and change your compete, avoid, and accommodated patterns to create option C with your body and work. And the exciting thing is your business and creative impact can become option C, which is a potent healing modality when you work in a collaborative, creative space with your body, which again, houses your vision and soul. And then I just wanted to leave with a quote. This is one of my favorite quotes, and I find it so inspiring on hard entrepreneurial days, but it's by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and it says, "The doors to the world of the wild self are few but precious. If you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, this is a door. If you love the sky and the water so much you almost cannot bear it, that is a door. If you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, a sane life, that is a door." And I hope that everyone will take their dreams and creative endeavors and realize that that's your window into your wild self and making the impact that only you can make. And then again, just those links again for the comfort eating style quiz, the breakfast experiment, and wanted to just let everyone know about my podcast, Insatiable, because it's totally out of the box and really helpful for people. So, all right. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you so much.